In a matter of minutes, a column of armored vehicles can be transformed into a trail of burning wrecks. This devastating reality is played out repeatedly across the front lines, with open-source trackers documenting thousands of Russian armored losses since the war began. What's truly striking is that a significant portion of these vehicles weren't destroyed by aircraft or long-range missiles, but by artillery guided by drones, and by small, inexpensive FPV attack drones that cost a mere fraction of the targets they eliminate. The scale of the destruction is immense, but the real shock lies in its breathtaking speed. Welcome to Strategic Horizon, where we dissect the intricate dance between steel and unmanned systems. Stick around, because we're about to uncover how a seemingly prepared mechanized assault can unravel into chaos, revealing a vulnerability that commanders are still struggling to comprehend. Imagine a mechanized column pushing forward, a tank in the lead, followed by armored personnel carriers loaded with infantry. Some vehicles are fitted with anti-drone cages, others deploy jamming systems. The crews believe they are prepared for a battlefield swarming with unmanned aircraft, yet preparation alone offers no guarantee of survival. Long before the column even approaches the defensive line, Ukrainian reconnaissance drones are already watching from above. As the convoy stretches along a narrow route, often mixed with open ground, every movement translates into a clear coordinate on a screen. The entire axis of movement begins to fracture the moment a single vehicle hits a mine or is forced to stop at an awkward angle. Artillery doesn't need to obliterate everything at once. Its purpose is merely to slow the column and compel soldiers to abandon their armor. It's at that precise moment that FPV drones enter the fray, transforming what initially appeared to be a routine push into a desperate race between reaction and destruction. The engagement commences with a classic mechanized assault. A Russian assault group forms, with a tank at its vanguard, armored personnel carriers following closely, and several support vehicles carrying ammunition and supplies trailing further back. This formation prioritizes speed and pressure. The lead tank is expected to absorb initial fire and clear obstacles, enabling APCs to deliver infantry close enough to dismount and secure ground. Logistics vehicles behind them ensure the push doesn't falter after the initial contact. The objective is direct: approach the Ukrainian defensive line, unload troops near key positions, and either continue advancing if resistance is weak, or withdraw along the same route if losses become too heavy. Timing is paramount. Maintaining momentum can force defenders into a reactive mode, but slowing down too soon renders the entire plan fragile. From the Ukrainian perspective, the engagement doesn't begin with a volley of gunfire. It starts with meticulous observation. Reconnaissance drones ascend high above the battlefield long before the armored group reaches the line of contact. Their primary mission isn't to strike first, but to analyze the formation's shape, measure the spacing between vehicles, and identify which units carry the most tactical weight. A tank leading the charge suggests one type of plan, while a dense cluster of APCs in the middle indicates another. As the convoy advances, drone operators track its route in real time, noting changes in speed, subtle turns in the road, and moments when the spacing between vehicles tightens. These details are crucial, as a stretched formation is inherently harder to protect uniformly. If the lead vehicle moves too far ahead, it becomes isolated. If rear vehicles lag, they risk being cut off. Russian crews may believe they are advancing towards a defensive line, but in reality, their progress is being meticulously translated into digital coordinates. Each armored hull becomes a moving point on a screen, allowing operators above to clearly discern their direction of travel. The chosen path begins to look less like a route of attack and more like a corridor being precisely measured. Inside their vehicles, soldiers focus on immediate threats, scanning tree lines, checking for mines, and relying on armor and onboard protection systems. What they cannot perceive is how their formation appears from altitude. From that vantage point, the order of vehicles, the gaps between them, and the rhythm of movement create a discernible pattern, a pattern that can be studied before a single shell is fired. At this stage, no explosions have occurred. Engines hum, radios remain calm, and the column maintains its planned direction. Yet the balance of the engagement is already shifting. One side is moving with steel and fuel, while the other is quietly constructing a comprehensive picture. A critical question now forms in the background. When the moment to strike arrives, which vehicle should be targeted first to shatter the push's structure? Should the lead tank be disabled to block the route, or an APC carrying infantry be hit to disrupt the human element of the assault? That choice will determine whether the column maintains its shape or begins to unravel. On the surface, the approach phase appears controlled, yet the column is already entering an unseen corridor of risk. The formation spreads out as it advances, with spacing appearing disciplined at first glance. Crews consciously avoid bunching up, knowing that tight clusters invite concentrated fire. By stretching the line, they hope to reduce the chance that a single strike could damage multiple vehicles simultaneously. On paper, this is a rational adjustment to a battlefield saturated with drones and artillery. In motion, however, the longer the column becomes, the harder it is to protect every segment with the same level of cover. The lead tank maintains a steady pace, APCs follow at measured intervals, and support trucks keep their distance behind. The result is a thin chain of steel moving across varied terrain. Each gap between vehicles serves as both a safety buffer and a potential weakness. If the first element encounters trouble, those behind must swiftly decide whether to close the gap or hold position. This hesitation can create a fracture in the overall rhythm. Some armored vehicles are fitted with metal cages designed to counter incoming FPV drones, while others appear equipped with electronic warfare systems intended to interfere with remote control signals. These additions alter the silhouette of each hull, offering crews a sense of layered protection. However, the level of defense is not uniform across the convoy. One unit might boast upgraded shielding, while another relies on older equipment. This uneven distribution means the line is only as strong as its least prepared section. As vehicles traverse open ground, visibility from above dramatically increases. Fields and shallow rises offer minimal concealment once the column leaves tree lines or built-up areas. From an aerial perspective, the contrast between armored shapes and the surrounding landscape becomes stark. Thermal cameras can detect engine heat, especially when speed decreases, and optical lenses track movement patterns across exposed routes. The risk intensifies significantly when the formation slows. Even a slight reduction in pace, whether due to terrain or caution, extends the time each vehicle remains within a defined observation zone. A moving target is difficult to lock onto. A slowing one becomes far easier to track. If one driver adjusts course or brakes unexpectedly, the vehicles behind must react, and that reaction can compress the line for a few critical seconds. Inside the convoy, attention remains focused forward. Commanders monitor radio traffic and watch for signs of mines or anti-tank teams. They assume that dispersion reduces vulnerability. What is less apparent to them is how dispersion also stretches their protective umbrella. Close-range air defense assets cannot be everywhere at once, and electronic jamming cannot fully blanket a column extending across several hundred meters. At this stage, nothing has exploded. Engines continue to push forward, and the plan appears intact. Yet, the geometry of the movement is subtly altering the balance. The longer the column grows, the more decision points it creates. A problem at the head might not be immediately felt at the rear, and a strike in the middle can split the group into isolated segments. The question now becomes direct and practical. When a convoy stretches across open ground and protective measures vary from vehicle to vehicle, where is the true breaking point? Is it at the front, where the path is chosen, or in the center, where disruption can divide the force into two vulnerable halves? The turning point arrives in a single, brutal moment when one vehicle stops in the wrong place and the entire axis of advance begins to collapse. As the column moves through this corridor of risk, the lead elements approach a section of ground that appears clear. There's no visible barrier, no immediate explosion in the air. Then, a sharp blast erupts from beneath one of the armored hulls. A mine detonates under a vehicle, or a hidden obstacle forces it to halt abruptly. The effect is immediate. The vehicle ceases its forward movement, blocking the narrow route. This single pause creates an instant bottleneck. The tank or APC behind it must brake, adjust, or attempt to maneuver around. On a confined path, there's little room for such maneuvers. Vehicles that were spaced out moments ago now compress under pressure, and the clean geometry of the formation vanishes. Above the battlefield, the reconnaissance drone shifts its focus. Instead of tracking the entire convoy, the operator locks onto the point where movement has stopped. This stalled vehicle becomes the anchor for the next phase. Coordinates are swiftly transmitted to artillery units positioned further back. What was once a moving line is now a fixed reference point. The initial artillery rounds don't need to destroy every target. They land close enough to force drivers to react. Shrapnel strikes armor, dust rises, and shockwaves ripple across the ground. A direct hit isn't required to create disorder. Even near impacts can damage wheels, tracks, or external equipment. More importantly, they compel crews to make decisions under intense stress. As shells continue to fall, some vehicles attempt to reverse, while others try to push forward around the obstacle. In that confusion, spacing breaks down further. A column designed for forward motion becomes trapped by its own length. Radio calls overlap, orders change rapidly, and the planned direction of attack devolves into a desperate struggle to regain control of the route. Inside the APCs, infantrymen sense the shift before they fully comprehend it. When armored carriers stop moving and incoming fire intensifies, remaining inside becomes a perilous risk. At a certain point, commanders issue the order to dismount. Hatches open, and soldiers jump out, scattering towards ditches, shallow trenches, or any depression in the ground that offers limited cover. This is their most exposed moment. When troops leave their vehicles, the protective shell of steel is gone. They must rely on terrain and speed to survive. From above, drone signatures capture the scene. Engines idle, and human figures move across open areas. What was once a column of machines now becomes a mixed cluster of stationary armor and dismounted personnel. Artillery continues to shape the space, with rounds landing in patterns that restrict movement rather than simply destroy. A damaged vehicle blocks the front, while incoming fire threatens the rear. The convoy is no longer advancing. It is held in place. At this stage, the assault has lost its rhythm. The original objective fades behind the urgent need to survive the immediate pressure. The battlefield fragments into small pockets where crews act locally instead of as one coordinated force. The question for viewers becomes clear. Which moment carries greater danger? Is it when armored vehicles are still rolling forward with engines at full power? Or when soldiers are forced to abandon those vehicles and search for cover in open ground under fire? The next phase begins when FPV drones enter the fight, turning disruption into outright destruction. After artillery has slowed the column and forced vehicles into awkward positions, small attack drones move in at low altitude. Their targets are no longer fast-moving armored hulls advancing in formation. They are damaged machines, stalled carriers, and crews desperately trying to regain control. A vehicle that has lost speed becomes easier to approach. A truck reversing under pressure cannot react quickly to a sudden dive from above. The first FPV drone locks onto a disabled armored carrier near the bottleneck. It approaches from a shallow angle, avoiding direct lines where defensive fire might track it. The impact is precise. The charge strikes the upper surface, and smoke rises from the hatch area. Even if the vehicle wasn't fully destroyed by artillery, this second hit ensures it will not rejoin the fight. Another drone shifts its attention to a machine attempting to retreat along the same route. The operator tracks it visually, adjusting course as the target weaves around debris. The goal isn't random damage, it's to remove mobility. A hit to the rear or side can cripple movement and block the path for others. Once a vehicle stops, the corridor narrows further. What stands out in this phase is how operators manage time. An FPV drone has a limited flight duration, and every second in the air matters. If one armored hull is already burning and offers no additional tactical value, the drone doesn't waste itself on a wreck. It searches for another active target within range, a constant reassessment that keeps pressure high. The pattern of strikes often follows a logic of division. Hitting the front element prevents forward progress, while striking the center splits the formation into two isolated groups. When the middle is cut, the rear cannot support the lead and the front cannot fall back easily. The result is confusion across the entire axis. Drivers hesitate, gunners scan the sky, and infantry attempt to reposition under extreme stress. Publicly released footage from Ukrainian drone units, including teams associated with Madar, has shown sequences where multiple vehicles are destroyed in rapid order. The rhythm is deliberate. One impact creates fire and smoke, a second strike targets a different hull within the same cluster, and a third drone follows up to ensure that damaged equipment is rendered unusable. The tempo is continuous rather than scattered. On the ground, the psychological effect builds quickly. Soldiers who have just dismounted now face threats from above. Crews inside surviving vehicles must choose between staying sealed inside or opening hatches to improve visibility. Neither option feels secure. A closed hatch limits awareness, while an open one increases exposure. As FPVs continue their runs, the battlefield changes character. What began as a mechanized push becomes a series of small, intense engagements around individual vehicles. Each strike narrows the options available to the remaining crews. Escape routes shrink, and communication grows chaotic. By this stage, the assault is no longer defined by its original objective. It is defined by survival and extraction. The critical question now shifts to the wider picture. When a convoy has been cut at key points and small drones keep circling above, should additional forces be sent forward to stabilize the situation? Or would that only add more targets to an already controlled corridor? The climax unfolds when protective cages fail under repeated strikes and support vehicles transform into explosive triggers. Several tanks in the stalled formation are fitted with metal grills designed to defeat incoming FPV drones. At first glance, these cages appear solid and well-positioned above the turret and engine deck. When the first drone dives, it hits the outer layer and detonates. The blast bends metal bars and throws fragments outward, but the core of the vehicle remains intact. Smoke rises, and the crew may initially believe their protection has worked. Seconds later, another drone approaches. This time, the structure is already damaged. Gaps have opened where steel was once aligned. The second impact doesn't need to land perfectly, it only needs to reach the weakened point created by the earlier explosion. The charge slips through the distorted frame and penetrates deeper. Flames burst from the top of the turret, and the earlier sense of safety vanishes. This pattern profoundly changes the battlefield experience. A single layer of protection is no longer enough when strikes come in waves. A vehicle that survives the first hit becomes a marked target for the next one. Operators above don't need to guess which hull has been softened. They can clearly see deformation and smoke and adjust their targeting accordingly. The danger escalates dramatically when support trucks are caught in the same zone. Ammunition carriers and fuel vehicles often position themselves slightly behind the armored line, awaiting a signal to move forward. In a fluid assault, they provide the energy that sustains the push. In a stalled corridor, however, they become catastrophic liabilities. One FPV drone locks onto a logistics truck loaded with shells. The impact ignites the stored rounds, triggering an explosion far larger than the drone's own charge. Secondary blasts ripple through the air. Burning debris scatters across nearby vehicles, and fire spreads quickly along exposed surfaces. Concrete and soil are showered with fragments. The scene transforms into a hazardous area where remaining crews cannot stand still. Engines rev as drivers try to escape the heat and falling debris. Infantry who had taken cover now face another wave of danger from expanding flames. The corridor, already under artillery and drone pressure, becomes a space where lingering, even for a minute, drastically increases the risk of catastrophic loss. At this juncture, the original mission has completely faded. The question is no longer how to advance several hundred meters. The urgent calculation becomes how to extract what remains. A damaged tank blocks the front. A burning truck threatens the middle. Vehicles at the rear must choose whether to reverse under fire or attempt to maneuver around wreckage in limited space. Commanders must make swift decisions. Sending additional units forward could help tow disabled armor or provide cover, but it could also add fresh targets to an already controlled kill zone. Pulling back might preserve surviving assets, yet retreat under pressure carries its own significant cost. The convoy is no longer an organized force. It is a fragmented collection of machines and men struggling to escape a narrowing trap. The outcome raises a difficult question for all leaders and analysts to consider. When a mechanized column has been locked in place and its defense is broken, should the remaining elements withdraw immediately to save what is left, or should more forces be committed in an attempt to rescue stranded vehicles and restore momentum? It takes only one stalled vehicle to transform a confident advance into a burning corridor of steel. Looking back at the full sequence, the most striking detail isn't a single explosion, but the chain reaction that pulled an entire mechanized column into a losing spiral. A mine or obstacle created the initial choke point. Reconnaissance drones locked onto the image from above. Artillery froze movement and forced crews into survival mode. FPV drones then moved in to finish what had already been weakened. The most dangerous moment was when the convoy had to stop and commanders faced a brutal decision between pushing forward under fire or pulling back through chaos. Once infantry abandoned the protection of armored hulls, the advantage of mechanized power began to fade. In the months ahead, the key issue will not solely be how many vehicles are lost. The real question is whether Russia can adapt its convoy tactics, improve close-range air defense, and restore mobility under skies filled with drones. Will forces be compelled to disperse into smaller groups, or will a new method emerge to break this pattern of layered disruption? The next battles may reveal whether this was a temporary setback or a lasting shift in how mechanized warfare survives in a drone-heavy environment. We invite you to share your view in the comments and join the Strategic Horizon community for more in-depth analyses of modern conflict.